Well, David, it's good to be here because previously the only way I could ever see pictures in your collection was by going to the loo in your house. I always liked coming and you must have thought I had a bladder problem or something, because I was always going upstairs to the loo because all your pictures were on the stairs, and it was good to see them, and seeing them in the gallery. And of course this is only a small part, but it's fantastic. It is a fantastic exhibition, very, very special. And what I always like about looking at someone's collection is that it tells me more about you, which I like. I thought I knew you pretty well, but this is about your interior world as much as anything, and I like that. One of the things that I'd like to do is to walk round with you, looking at different pictures. But the theme that I have in my head is something that came out of a conversation we had a while back, where I said something to you about certain photographers whose work seems to transport you into a completely other space. And in this gallery, there are, we can't look at everything and talk about every picture, but it seemed to me that we could look at a handful of pictures for which that to me is a common theme, where you're kind of lifted into some magical space that that you could never create inside a camera yourself, and it's kind of the wonder of seeing that thing.
Good.
And so I thought maybe we could have a little walk about, and I could say this one really, and you could talk about it a bit.
And I'll probably be seeing the pictures almost for the first time. Because people don't realise that if you take the monetary value out of the thing, which obviously if you're a true collector you do, it's really not that much different from collecting bus tickets. You have lots of bus tickets and you have a collection of bus tickets. And so the fun in the main for me was the researching to see what pictures I liked by what people, and making those decisions, that they are decisions. I am saying I like this picture. And not only do I like the photographer, but I like the picture within that. And so the second that I'd done all the complicated things about swapping the pictures, which is the most difficult thing, is to actually get the pictures, having said you're going to swap, they'd then go in a drawer, or actually in an archival box. And of course, this is the first time I've seen them since they're displayed. So I'm delighted to go around and see my collection. Yes.
Brilliant. Let's do that. Let's do that. Okay. So the first picture that I would like to talk to you about is this Bruce Davidson, David. So I'll tell you what I think about Bruce Davidson is that 1969 was a really crucial year for me, because it was when I decided to become a photographer. So I was 17, and I saw this film called Beautiful, Beautiful on BBC. It was an omnibus program, and it featured, among others, Bruce Davidson. And he was then shooting East 100th Street. And I saw somebody who was using his camera to as a way of introducing himself to people. It was a kind of trade-off. Here am I'm interested in you and what you're doing, and all I can give you is a picture, really. And then I look at this picture. For me, this is a completely magical picture in that I don't know what the hell it's about, really. What is it that excites you about it? I mean, it's not one of the classics from his gangs, the gangs.
It is from the gangs.
It is from the gangs, but it's not a classic in the sense that it
doesn't have a girl in it.
It doesn't have a girl in it. The classic pictures are the couple snogging in the back of the bus and all of that, and the people going down to Coney Island and so on. But this is a different sort of picture. This has sort of elements of religion, and there's a bit of cool, these dark specks, somebody hiding their head. But for me, it's one of those pictures that drags me through into another world, and I'm thinking, oh, that's a spooky place. It's sort of somewhere else, and I'm just wondering why you collected this of all the Bruce Davidson pictures you could have had. Okay,
well, if I go back a little bit, when I started 55, 56, the magazines had closed in England. There were really only newspapers. And so all the potential work was in what you could loosely call current affairs, which I was just starting in photography. I still at that time had a little folding camera. And the people that I began to admire around me were people like McCullin and Philip Jones Griffiths and Patrick Ward, Ian Berry. And these were all people that were, in a way, very geared to current affairs-y type of story, so I was very aware that I was running second best to them. And then I met this lovely photographer called Sergio Leone, who I met. We were both photographing pigeons, as I enjoyed doing, at that time. And we became very good friends. And he showed me some of his pictures. And it was a revelation to me, because I'd been used to, we better go and do Bertrand Russell is doing his peace talk or something, which is wonderful to do, but it wasn't really my interest, But I suddenly saw Sergio's pictures and I thought, God, this is like poetry, He introduced me to a man called John Hillison, who represented Magnum. And at that time, some of the Magnum photographers were being brought over to England to work for Queen magazine and Nova and magazines like that. And one of the first ones that came over was Bruce Davidson. And I had seen Bruce Davidson's pictures, and particularly he'd done some early pictures of Rodin's model or something, an elderly woman
in Paris. I've seen that
in Montmartre. It's
yeah.
Just so it's so delicate and so beautiful, and so I thought, well, I said, I'll work at getting girlfriends for Bruce Davidson when he's here, or act as his assistant or whatever it is, And I was staggered, because there was this young guy, and he's the same age as I am, roughly. I think he's a year older. And this is one of the greatest photographers in the world. And I still had a folding flipping retina camera, So I was in total awe of him. So we went around in a little Mini and drove around. He did a series primarily on the English. And I just learned so much. I just learned how to be a proper photographer, the dedication, the involvement, the willing to get up in the morning, the willing to go to bed late at night. Everything was absolutely done superbly well. I loved it. And when I came to sort of asking Bruce for a picture, because at that, I didn't say to him, or cut your present, let's swap a print, at that time, prints had no value in themselves. They were something that you had made and you gave to a magazine. The magazine paid you for it, and that was it. So it was comparatively easy, if you wanted to. Bizarrely, nobody else seemed to want to. You could say to somebody, I really love your picture, and that would be flattering, and I'd love it, and they'd give you a print, But I always wanted to pick the print that I wanted. And in a way, the print that I picked relates a little bit back to Sergio, It has that same kind of feeling. I love the idea that it didn't have to be totally sharp. It didn't have to be about something. You know, it didn't have to be a caricature that you know, this is Bertrand Russell, we need to see him. It wasn't. It was just a mood.
A feeling.
A feeling.
Yeah.
And Bruce does feeling very well.
I think this exhibition does feeling very well. Good. I mean, I think it's one of the things that's hardest in academic life for academics to understand, is that actually what photographers are trying to do is make people feel something.
Absolutely.
And that's not measurable.
No.
But you and I both have the same. This is high on our list. This is a 10 out of 10 feeling picture.
And it's a picture. It's a picture. And my guess is that most people that look at this picture, most people, 90%, will get something out of it. Now, what I find lovely, which I think puzzles the academic, is that I am absolutely pleased that everybody gets something different out of it. You know, you each get your own feeling. You know, I don't want to be told how I'm supposed to look at this picture, because I want to know how I want to look at this picture, you know. And they're the pictures I love best, the ones that are not quite so clear. They have a sort of otherness that photography shouldn't have. I mean, all photography is a bloody box with a hole in the front, you know. Light goes through, and we should know exactly what it's all about because of that. But actually the best photography has another dimension, you know. And this reeks of that, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's
the most extraordinarily beautiful picture, but it's very difficult to explain why, apart from the fact that I feel it occupies some part of my inner space, which it somehow has reached something inside my head that
and it allows you to invent things, you know. It has those sort of overtones. And then if you see the set of the picture, the whole set, which is on the gang, then it's like a jigsaw puzzle that you've just got one piece of, and you suddenly realize, hang on, these other pieces all also work, also fit. And the beauty about the great photographers, I think, is that they tend to take sets of pictures of which every part of it, if possible, stands by itself, you know, in some way. So every single picture in this set of pictures is just wonderful.
That's a lovely set, yeah.
Yeah.
Good, let's move on.
To where?
I want to go to Don next. Can we go and look at
Yeah,
Don?
we can go and look at Don.
Now, I'm still in 1969 for me, because in 1969 I not only saw that film with Bruce Davidson, Beautiful, but I also saw this story in the Sunday Times. And it's lost its cover, I'm afraid. But this is the story that picture originally appeared in. So here it is from the actual magazine from 1969.
They did it sideways.
Sideways. I know. Isn't that absolutely amazing? You know. And you look at this. You know,
Harold Evans?
Yeah. Well, this was at that time. You look at this. This is the story about Biafra, and I was looking at it again last night, and it's written. The journalist who did the writing is Richard West.
Yeah.
So it starts with a Don opening spread. And I've only met Don twice. Once was at your opening, and once was an earlier time. And I remember asking him about why he had people looking at him. I mean, one of the things that seems to me distinguishes Don's war photography is that very often the action is interrupted by somebody looking at him. And here's this person looking at him while he's, you know, plainly, trying not to be shot. Then the article is not tucked away, but it's done what text does. It's, you know, you get a page of text, but you get adverts all around it. But you know, you're reading about Biafra and about what the British government has caused to happen there, and how the Biafran people are starving. But it goes on through several pages, quite a heavy piece, and then you're into the pictures. Look, and there's a little line of black captions along the bottom, but double spread in colour, then 1, 2, 3 pictures, 4 pictures in black and white, then another double spread in colour, then this picture here, which is actually, the caption is quite interesting. 24-year-old mother suckles her child. Kwashiorkor, the disease bred of starvation, has been renamed the Harold Wilson syndrome and is entered as such in the Biafran death certificate. Isn't that amazing? Yeah. And then you've got another, it's completely falling to pieces. You've got another 1, 2, 3 pictures in double page spread, and then another double page spread, black and white and colour, and then another double page spread. Yeah. This is, once you've seen a Sunday magazine that does it like this, you don't really want to see anything else, do you? I mean, they did it so well, didn't they? Do it so well.
I mean, this is a particularly large one. The sort of 8 pages was usually the sort of size. But no, I mean, there were very good people there. Harold Evans was there, the Sunday Times was great. But there were other magazines. Queen magazine had Mark Boxer, great editor. Nova had Petrinotti there, and these were really good magazines, and they were magazines that used the best photographers. I mean, this sort of vague myth as though the great photographers didn't start until the 70s. I mean, Arbus, D. Friedlander, Bruce Davidson, a whole mass of these people were brought over by Queen magazine in the early 60s. They were working. But no, Don is a terrific photographer. I mean, in my opinion, probably with Brandt, Britain's greatest photographer. But there was an extraordinary group of them then. I mean, we were very lucky. We were all roughly the same age. We came out of this legacy of George Roger, probably the best photographer during the Second World War, Kurt Hutton, Grace Robinson, Spender, Bert Hardy. I mean, that's a hell of a good group of photographers. And they were people that I went out of my way to go and meet, and they were easy to meet. I mean, Brandt I met by just knocking on his door and more or less saying, I think you're a wonderful photographer. And people quite like that. They quite like that. And then the next group, when I started, was myself and Don and Philip Jones Griffiths and John Bulmer, Patrick Ward. They're all here. Ian Berry. That's a pretty good group of photographers. No, I mean, not only they're a group of photographers, but 50 years later, they're all working. They care so much about it. They're slower. I had this lovely thing with Don and John Bulmer. We had breakfast talking about how we were falling to bits, and what parts of us still worked that we could manage to actually hold the camera with or something. But the drive was there, the passion was there. And with Don, you rightly point out this thing. Some photographers, myself included, I don't want people to look at me. I'm kind of an observer, etc. Don has always been, and I mean this in the best way, very confrontational. His pictures are to do with his relationship with the subject matter. It happens that he has such a wonderful, generous, nice, trusting personality that people relate to him. So you look at this picture, which is, I mean, this is a woman in the most distressing situation it seems to me a woman could possibly be in. There she is. She's trying to feed her child. She's got no milk and the child is starving. But just look at that face. That is staggering dignity. That woman has dignity. If anybody is going to survive, she is saying to Don, bugging you, I'm going to be a survivor, He does that better than anybody's ever done it, And it is...
I did ask him about that. Yeah. So many pictures where the people have eyeballed the camera, and in journalism we tend not to want to do that because we're trying to give the illusion that we're not there.
Yeah, yeah.
But he said, the reason I really do it, he said, is because I want the reader to know that it's all right for me to have taken the picture.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's okay. It's difficult because he's a really sensitive person, and he's sadly, I think, you know, he's genuinely a little bit tormented at the moment, and part of our whole conversation over the weekend was about this problem. You know, do we really do any good? He was saying that he was so pleased because he met a doctor in, I'm not quite sure whether it was Vietnam, but the doctor said that he had become a doctor because he'd seen some of Don McCullin's pictures, you know. And that was almost, in Don's world, the highlight of his career, you know, that he had been part of a person becoming a doctor. And it was I had a lovely conversation with him, and he's a dear, incredible
The one funny thing he said to me was that he didn't value the magazine in the sense that he didn't keep it. So at the time when it was shot, you know, it was out there, and he didn't keep the magazine, so he hasn't got a lot of his own spreads. And when he feels the need to see them, he has to go and buy them from collectors for vast sums of money. But I don't, to be honest, I don't think he'd want this one very much.
No, but I mean, you see, that's one of the things that I was saying over there is that there were no such things as photo galleries at that time. So the idea of the print having some commercial value that somebody else could flog it for you and give you a percentage of your own flipping work, that wasn't around. No. The idea of pictures was to take pictures of which you wanted to get them out to the maximum public. Now, I think that's coming round a little bit. You talk about this sort of thing here. I've just had a thing now with the BBC, with somebody I'm working very closely with, which is going out to an audience of 4 million, and it's more spreads than this.
Yeah.
So, but it's
on the web. On BBC Online.
On the web.
Online,
on the BBC. And I find that intriguing. I mean, the problem with it is that it's difficult to know how you get any money from it. Whereas when this was done, you got very little money, but you did in theory get paid, you know. So the problem is, I think, not the space now. It's not whether there's magazines, it's how you get somebody to give you some money, you know. But that problem will be solved. It'll be solved.
Let's hope so. Now, while we're here, because we've dealt with, you know, the single picture that's lifted out of a picture story, and then we've seen a picture story, and we've looked at Don's the context of one. But I wanted to look at one that was, while we're here, we've mentioned Brandt, and we're in this corner. I'd like to just talk about this picture as well, because I remember seeing Don and Bruce Davidson in Beautiful, Beautiful, the BBC Omnibus film was one thing. Collecting Don's pictures from the magazines was another thing that got me going. And then in 1970, I went to the Bill Brandt show at the Hayward. Yeah. And that really blew my socks off for all kinds of reasons. Not least because it seemed to me that Brandt very particularly did the thing that Bruce Davidson did, but it was very alarming to see it being done in Britain, where he's using his camera as a kind of passport to move between the social classes. Yeah. And so I was aware of, before I saw the show, I probably wasn't aware of Brandt at all, but the pictures that stayed in my head from the show were all of these ones where somebody was moving between the social classes in Britain, which was a very difficult thing, still I think is a difficult thing to do. But while I was there were these landscapes, and you think, wait a minute, photographers, they photograph, you know, they do sort of documentary work, they do all those strange sort of semi-fictional setups of, you know, London people kissing in bars and stuff that were, you know, they looked like scenes out of movies. They do pictures of naked women, of which he had quite a lot, and they meet famous people. And I thought, wow, this is a pretty good job to have. And then they go to nice places, and then there were these extraordinary landscapes, which are probably his most, would you say, his most painterly pictures, in that they're the least documentary, maybe, anyway. I mean, it's a very spooky feel.
I mean, the thing about Brandt is that you go, as you rightly say, these various little genres of photography almost, but they have authorship. If you see them, you know they're by Brandt, you know. This is a Brandt landscape, you know. Now, part of it is obviously the intensity of printing, in printing great sheets of black and white, etc. But you have to see the picture first to be able to do that, you know. And he has this unique thing. But he was working for magazines. This was the cover of Picture Post.
It was a cover picture.
A cover picture.
Really? Because they usually had a pretty girl on the cover.
Yeah. But this was when Ffoton Hopkinson was there, you know. And I just love the Brandt pictures, primarily those in Picture Post, but there were also quite a lot in Lilliput magazine.
Yeah.
And an American magazine called Holiday had a lot of, which also published a lot of Bresson's pictures. And I just loved them. And I just needed to meet him, you know.
So when you knocked on his door,
yes.
and he said, "Who are you?" And you said, "I've come because I want to tell you I think your pictures are great. You're a good photographer." He said, "Oh, have a print," did he?
Well, almost. No. I mean, what actually happened was that it seems to me that I keep saying this thing, but doers attract doers, and chatters attract chatters, you know. And sincerity, true sincerity, really can be picked up. So if you knock on the door of somebody like Brandt and you start saying, "Look, Mr. Brandt, I'm sorry to bother you, but I really love your pictures," and then you start talking about specific pictures you've liked and why you like them, it's very easy to pick up somebody who's really sincere and really cares about it, you know. Even if all they do is care about looking at pictures, you know. And so he invited me in, and a couple of times I went to see him, and then I said to him at some time, you know, I've started to get this bit. I just love the feel of having the original print, and there's something almost religious about it in that you feel the print of somebody you really love, and it's almost as though their aura is in that print in a little bit. You know, it's obviously all in the head, and it's total bullshit.
It's good bullshit.
But it's really good bullshit. Yeah, you know, and it's very, very productive bullshit because it makes you want to do the same, you know. And so, you know, he gave me a couple of prints, the ones that I particularly liked. I have the picture of the miner eating. It's actually, sadly, I thought it was in Wales, but it wasn't. It's in Northumberland, which was, and I have a wonderful picture which I've never ever seen, which is some tailors sewing and things, and I liked him enormously, and one of the things I loved about him, because I was really worried about, you know, making money, etc. And he said, "David, don't worry about it. Just go and do what anybody pays you to do, but do it well." He said, "Don't be frightened about money." And he actually said to me, he never shot a picture in his life that he wasn't paid for. So that was reassuring, because, you know, you hear people, you know, "Oh God, you can't possibly do that. You know, you're breaking your link with God or something, or whatever it is." But here is one of the greatest British photographers, one of the greatest world's photographers, who just was a working photographer. He earned his living shooting pictures. As Bresson said, you know, we're just a little bit better than, you know, we do something more enjoyable than plumbers, and there's nothing wrong in that.
No.
That's what I would say all the time.
No.
Wrong in that.
There's loads of pictures I'd like to talk about, but I want to move over and discuss the Anders Petersen picture.
Yeah.
I mean, this, you know, I'm passing by some terrific stuff, you know, like there's the Tony Ray Jones. And, I mean, there's a lot here that I really like. But I'm trying to keep in this magical space for me, things that are in my magical space. So Anders Peterson, I first came across him, I think, in Impressions Gallery in New York. I saw the book of the bar. I suppose this would be in sort of 1973 or something. He photographed in this sort of nightclub down by the docks, a sort of bar place. I can't remember what it was called, the Cafe something. And it's full of all these pictures that again entered my head and play around in there in a way that's difficult to describe, but which stay. And they're about raw human emotions: anger, drink, love, sex, desire, yearning, poverty, ambition. For me, yeah, you know, I mean, all locked up in one book, you know, one set of pictures like that. And then, so tell me about, when did you first
well, I'm going to say something that's going to sound terribly pompous, but I first saw Anders' pictures in Creative Camera when they somehow Bill J had found them and put them in Creative Camera. And I wrote a long letter to him, because he was just young starting photographer. And I just wrote a letter saying that I think your pictures are remarkable, you know, that if you can stick at it and keep at it, you will be one of the great photographers. Then I didn't think more about it. 40 years later, I go to Sweden, and Anders is Swedish, and I'm going over to see a friend there. And I suddenly get this invite to dinner with the photographers of Seine. And I go there, and there's wonderful, there's 4 or 5 of these. Paul Hansen was there, and a couple of people whose name, Nielsen was there, who did the wonderful baby pictures.
Oh yes, in the womb.
Then extraordinary. And so Anders gets up and he said, I'm giving this dinner for David because on my darkroom wall I have a letter from him. And he said, and it really helped me enormously, you know. And I was incredibly touched. But I also realized that it's really nice if you go and see people and you really tell them how good you think they are, if you think they're good, they really appreciate it. They really appreciate it. You know, there's too much of this sort of strange bitchiness about, oh, he's a murderer, etc. Forget the ones you don't like, you know.
Go for the ones you do.
Go for the ones you do. And I think he's a great photographer, and I think this is the most gentle, beautiful picture. Beautiful, beautiful picture. I mean, it takes a little bit before you realise it's actually 3 people. There's this person that she's kissing, and then there's this other one that's sort of almost kissing her on the neck, you know. It's very erotic, it's very sensual, and it's beautifully, beautifully seen. And he's just the most lovely man, just the most lovely man.
And it's also about being sexy without being brazen.
Absolutely.
You don't have to have lots of nudes jumping up and down to make the picture sensually fantastic.
I was going to say it's one of my all-time favourite pictures, but then I look around and I think,
I'm deliberately skipping around because otherwise we'll be here forever.
And this is 100, but there's actually, the collection I gave them is 700, so there's another 600 of them still in boxes. But it's an astonishing collection. I'm going to pick my stick up and we'll go. I want to move around this way if we can. So I want to talk a bit about Koudelka. The reason I want to talk about Koudelka is that I obviously discovered his work when I was a young photographer, and then when I came to work at Newport, there he was. I walked into the darkroom one day and there was Josef in the darkroom, and I then realised that you and he were very good friends. So I just want, can you tell us a bit about how that friendship came about? Well, talking about darkrooms, normally one develops a roll of film in a little spiral, and you put it in, and you develop it, and I suppose the whole process takes half an hour or something to get it, and then you hang it up later. Maybe it takes a little bit longer, 3/4 of an hour. So it's quite a long process. And if you were very posh, you might have had a tank which had four in it, so you could do
4 rolls of film
four
going through
rolls
at the
of
same
film,
time.
okay. Koudelka had photographed in Czechoslovakia the uprising, and because of that had actually had to come out of Czechoslovakia, and Elliot Erwitt, who was then president of Magnum, had invented an award for Josef so that he could come out, and Elliot, who was a dear friend of mine and used to stay with me in Bayswater in what became the DOS house of Bayswater because so many people slept there, etc. Said he was going to bring this photographer, Josef Koudelka. Could he develop some film, you see? So Josef arrives and they open the front door and there's Josef dressed exactly as he is now, you know, with sort of National Health Service sort of glasses and a green shirt and a thing. That time not speaking very good English. And so he comes in. I said to him, Josef, I understand you want to develop some film, you know. How many rolls of film have you got? He says, 800. So already my mind is going, an hour, that's 800 hours. Anyway, he stayed, I think, for 8 years or something. You know, he used to use it as his base. And I just love him. I mean, we actually introduce each other to other people as this is my brother now as a thing. And he's the dearest man. He's the hardest working person I've ever known. Absolutely extraordinary. The most fanatical. For quite a lot of people, therefore one of the most difficult, you know. But he kind of gives me a picture every Christmas or sometime, you know, which is lovely. And I just happen to think, you know, if I had to do this silly game of 10 great photographers or even 5 great photographers, Sergio Leone would be in there, and Koudelka would be undoubtedly in there as well. You know, they would probably, if I had to pick 2, they would be.
The thing that always amazes me about Koudelka is this extraordinary formality about the arrangements in the pictures. I mean, like if you could almost cut these shapes out.
Yes.
They're very distinct, and you could start moving them around.
Well,
you could literally move these around and go, oh, would this be better in another, you know, could this little girl, if she was just back a little bit, or this shadow was a tiny bit, and you realise that they're actually all in the right place.
They're in the right place. Well, they're in the right place for two reasons. One is that the thing that you said, I mean, he started to shoot his panoramics when he was still staying with me. And he would go out with them and he would literally make a big print of it and then cut it up and then restructure. And for a year, he never showed any of the panoramics to anybody because he was busy trying to, in his mind, deal with this very difficult shape to deal with.
Long and thin shape. But so he literally cut them up with a pair of scissors.
Cut them up and just moved the things around. And that's what he'd do. Yeah. He'd do it for hours. Yeah. And if you look at the contact sheets of these, you know, this is not, oh, I've seen this bang. Yeah. He's seen the situation, and in this particular thing, there's probably about 8 pictures, which are almost, they're just subtly the change. He's moved a little bit this way, a little bit, somebody's moved a little. So it's almost like stalking an animal or something, you know, which the end thing is that you just take a photograph of it. You don't kill it, luckily. But Bresson's the same, and Salgado's the same.
But he's a strange, I mean, talking about the different personalities of the photographers that are on the wall, like Don McCullin has this really, I am here, I'm completely solid, you know, we have to deal with the fact that I'm here sort of personality, while at the same time being incredibly polite and warm, but direct. Whereas Josef is almost invisible, it seems. I mean, like I could never even attempt to be Josef Koudelka because I'm 2.5 feet too tall and I make too much noise. You know, I mean, he's kind of just there and he wistfully moves about.
That's why we're all different. That's why we all take different pictures. That's why we have think it's called authorship.
Yeah. And his pictures are so distinctly Koudelka pictures.
I just absolutely adore them. And
right, I think I'm ready for a bit of a sit down, and then we might talk about some pictures over here. So, David, this is a wall that's been curated pretty much as a Magnum wall, I think. This is your Magnum pals. But I could really, we could spend all day just here. But I wanted to talk about the David Alan Harvey picture, the Paris photograph in colour there. Yeah. Because it seems to me that another thing that inspired me when I was young was National Geographic. There used to be piles of magazines lying around when I was at school and I was a small boy, and in break times and stuff, you were allowed to just kind of lie on the floor and look at magazines. And I used to look at National Geographic a lot, and it always was magic to me how they brought you the world in these pictures that you could just spend time contemplating. And the David Alan Harvey seems to me to be an absolutely classic National Geographic type picture, but at the same time it transcends the classic National Geographic picture. It's classic in that you've got, chic looking, it's in Paris, and it's obviously for a story about Paris in some way. You've got chic-looking French women smoking in that, very elegant way. You've got the river, the Seine, and in the background you can see a little bit of the Eiffel Tower, so you know where you are. So in a sense, he's covered all the bases, but the picture transcends that for me, and that it's a bit like the Koudelka picture. The organising of everybody within the frame is very beautiful. And it seems to me this is an example of somebody, I don't know David Alan Harvey at all, I've never met him, but he was I don't know whether National Geographic has staff photographers or whatever, but I mean basically he was working and being published in maybe not every edition, but pretty much all the time. He must have covered stories all over the world on assignment, and yet he manages to pull these pictures, beautiful pictures in all the time.
Yeah, well, National Geographic is basically an educational magazine. That's what it sees its job at. And therefore it attempts to be extremely accurate, particularly in its text of the type of thing. It's very authoritative, etc. And it has these wonderful photographers that can beautifully illustrate that text in a way, and they have a whole batch of them. Very often they did geography at university or something. Stuart Franklin, for example, that worked for National Geographic a lot, was a first, I think, at Oxford or Cambridge in geography. And David Alan Harvey was the same. But a few of those people have what I would feel is just a little bit extra. There's a wonderful photographer who I know we tried to get into Magnum called Bill Allard.
Yeah, William Albert Allard. Yeah, I love his work. Yeah.
And he was for National Geographic, but he's continued. And I mean, his argument was very simple. Look, I'm doing what I want to do whenever I want to do it. I'm being paid a lot of money and not giving anybody else any of the money. And that was an honest, good answer. But he's a wonderful photographer. And David is the same, except that David decided that by coming into Magnum, he would still be able to get lots of assignment because he's so good, but he would have the backup of archive and all that sort of thing. But he actually also runs a magazine called Hurn, I think it's called. I think it might be a web magazine, but it's highly, highly successful. But it's interesting to me, I did a little survey in the last 10 years about, where photographers come from. A little survey with Magnum. And what was slightly surprising about that was that not a single person had come into Magnum that had gone to photo school. They all came from those that came, most, I think a third were self-taught in any case. Some worked for local newspapers, and then those that had been to university did geography or history or politics, or bizarrely, in the case of Olivier, Oliver, mathematics, engineering. Very interesting, isn't it?
Yes,
And they're all, you sense that they're all subjects of which photography allowed them to expand their interest. In other words, they're subjects where people have a very distinctive. So I'm saying that because in the case of David and in the case of Stuart Franklin, when you see their stories, they're very much from somebody who understands about geography. That's.
I had a funny story from Peter Marlowe, another Magnum photographer.
Sadly died.
So very recently, yes, he was a student at Manchester University.
Yes.
When I was living on my bus. And I used to park the bus up and go off and shoot pictures or whatever I was doing. And he came across my bus parked up. I just used to park it by the side of the road somewhere in Manchester. It was just parked up with the pictures in the window and stuff. And he said, I came back 3 days running. I was knocking on the door. I said, what did you want to know? Did you want me to take your picture? He said, no, I wanted to know how to become a photographer.
That's lovely. That's lovely. Well, he was a wonderful photographer, and sort of moved. He was originally a very journalistic, hot newsy person, and then ended up at the end doing very sort of almost what you could call travel still lifes in a way, but very elegant, very beautiful, very beautiful. Yeah.
Right, I want to move on. I mean, it's terrible to move away from so much stuff, but there's other areas I want to talk about. And I want to talk more about colleagues and students and people who did things here in Wales. Go and look at some Newport stuff. Yeah. But, you can't walk past a Dorothea Lange without noticing it.
Well, there's a sale at Sotheby's at the moment, and you can buy that for 90,000 quid.
Does Wales know how much money you've given them, David?
The world is totally bonkers. Totally bonkers.
Right, now this is, we're moving into the area of work done by people who are connected with Newport. Once you came to teach at Newport, there are pictures here by students and by colleagues, people who were teaching, people who were students, people who were colleagues at the, like Keith Arnott and myself, and Sue Packer and Paul Rees. But there's a photographer whose work I've never seen enough of, but whenever I see his pictures, they just enchant me. Is Chris Chapman. I think this is a Chris Chapman, is it not? Yeah. This one here. Tell me about how you feel about when you see former students' work and what that does for you.
Well, by and large, I'm kind of proud of the course we had, because people forget that the course was set up to get people jobs. That was the criteria. We very deliberately, it was only a 2-year course. We very deliberately had the lowest possible qualifications because I didn't want people coming in and to get a qualification. I wanted people jobs. And we did slightly later set up it as being what's called a TOPS course, Training Opportunities course, which basically meant that we could get grants from people that had been steel workers or miners or something to help them with materials and things like that. So what one really tried to do was, I wasn't very interested in looking at portfolios initially. I wanted to know what people were interested in. And then we could have a discussion about whether there was a job in that particular genre, because I'm a great believer, if you've got 20 students, they should be doing 20 different types of work, And Chris Chapman, one of the things that was quite good about being in an art college was that the guy that ran it, John Wright, was very fluid. And so Chris Chapman and Sue Packer, who's the picture, they were both doing art there. Sue was doing ceramics and Chris was a painter. And they both saw what was happening in the photo course. And in the case of Sue, originally, she asked me to photograph some of her ceramics because they kept getting broken and things like that. And then she saw what was happening in photography, and Chris, and they both transferred into the... Yeah, Chris is an extraordinary man. I mean, he now lives on Dartmoor or something, and he's Mr. Dartmoor. You know, he knows every bloody rock there. He used to earn quite, you know, money by taking people from hotels and saying, you know, this is a clapper bridge, and this moss here is called so and so.
Guiding people around.
And
holiday makers.
Yeah. And he has this extraordinary collection of pictures of the moors and things, and anything to do with countryside and all that sort of thing. And he was friends with James Villiers, who was a similar type of photographer, and he's kept to that, and he just does it beautifully. And one of the sadnesses I find in this country is how certain people sort of want to keep their little genre as though it's much more important than anybody else's, and it's kind of nonsense. I mean, Chris was never like that. Chris does what he does, and he just does it beautifully.
And this is, absolutely delightfully weird little picture, isn't it?
It's a lovely picture, isn't it? I mean, it's gentle, it tells you about life, it's... And you know, these are people that were students. This is Glenn Edwards, who's... You know, this is a guy, he's gone out and he's always in bloody Africa catching diseases or something or other. And you know, it must have been 50 times for NGOs, set up a hospital there for deaf people. I mean, that's extraordinary. And he's not appreciated in the way he should be. And Nick worked for the Western Mail a lot. And this is an extraordinary news picture, I think. I love it. Because,
Independent tropical Wales.
Yeah, well, I've actually photographed, when I was photographing, I photographed that side. So I know that he would have thought beforehand, discovered where they were going to go, and as, you know, I'm sure he wasn't just happening to be there, you know, so that's what.
It's lovely. I mean, it's not, you know, you've got the Queen and Prince Philip and Charlie, and but they were waiting for everything, you know, like everything about these pictures are the way we used to teach them at Newport, you know, like you've got to, don't cut off the nose of the horse, wait for their hand to be waving, and then they're all looking this way and they're waving back. Everything's come together at the same time. Perfect, being ambitious for your photography.
And this is
Sian Trenberth.
She was the youngest person we ever had. I met her. I was photographing the opera, and suddenly there was this young girl by the side, very pretty. Turned out she was 17, just late 17, and she was also shooting some pictures. And I was. Sometimes you can watch somebody, and you know that they're really trying very hard. You know. And I said to her, "Oh, you like photography?" And she said, "Yeah, I'd love to be a photographer." So I said, "Well, you should come on the course at Newport, you know." And then it turned out that she was too young, so we had to pretend she was older. But we used to do those things, and at the College of Art you could do it at that time. And this is not typical of her later. I mean, she went off and you know, she wanted to earn a living, and she became, I understand from people that do it, probably one of the best wedding photographers in South Wales. And then she got aboard with that and started doing portraits, and she became an exceptionally good portrait photographer. You know, she bought herself 2 houses, so she wasn't doing too badly out of it. And now she's got into dance and ballet and works with the Royal Ballet Company, you know. I mean, incredibly successful person. So lovely. I mean, she's just as lovely as she was when she was that age, and that's nice. And she's actually very good friends with Glenn.
And I mean, she has this wonderful magic spell feel to these pictures, because this could be, if you said this was Brassai or Brandt taken in the 1930s, apart from the polythene bag, you know, but apart from the polythene bag, it's pretty, it's kind of timeless, but it's also like, it's surreal, because you've got this woman who's sort of doing the V for victory sign, And then this other one who appears to be on fire. You know, it's like she hasn't noticed that the other one's caught fire.
No,
Absolutely charming.
And this is extraordinary.
Oh, Tish Merthyr, yeah, goodness, she was a character and a half.
She was the quickest interview we ever had.
Yeah.
In that she came in, and I remember it was very early on. Said to her, "Oh, what is it you want to photograph, Tish?" And she said, I want to photograph policemen kicking kids." And I said, fine, you're in. Because you instantly know that she is going to be a social photographer. Yeah. She knows what she's about, you know. And she was a wonderful photographer. Sadly, she had this sort of difficult personality, you know. So she could have been incredibly successful, but every time she did anything for somebody that somebody paid her, she fell out with them for all.
There's quite a nice collection of her work in the Side Gallery, I think, in Newcastle.
The Side Gallery was a great place. I mean, I say it was. I don't know if it's still there. I don't think it...
No, it's received money now, and they're building a massive archive, which
was
they're making
extraordinary.
accessible.
They had people like Chris Killip was up there at one time, Lisa Continent, something or other.
Circa Lisa Continent,
was there, who was a very good photographer, you know. They were serious people. And so she was in the right place.
Graham Smith was there?
Graham Smith was up there, that's right. She was in the right place, but...
and of course Ron McCormick was there for a while, and Ron taught at Newport.
And sadly she died early too. Yeah. But they are getting her archive.
Her daughter's
together.
working hard on her archive, isn't she? We mustn't turn our back on Keith Arnett, but we do need to go on.
Well, Keith is important for me.
He was like another brother to you, wasn't he? Keith and Josef. I always think of the three of you like the Holy Trinity.
Yeah, and Bill J. But Bill was in America later. Keith, I literally virtually saw him every single day because he lived in the same village. I mean, there was this peculiar thing of Sue Packer, Keith Arnett and myself living in the same village. Keith was important to me because Keith was originally an exceptionally well-known conceptual artist. And so to talk to him every day and have conversations and later be asked by him to do his retrospective show was wonderful because I began to learn quite a lot about conceptual art, etc. And to be honest, it didn't really interest me. But what interested me about Keith was when he decided he wanted to be a photographer, I always saw him essentially as a documentary photographer. He was very much to do with observation and things like that. We used to have long talks about it. But
I always think of him as a still life. Well, this series, obviously not the people pictures, but the stuff he did on rubbish, to me, it was such a homage to Dutch still life painting. It seemed to me
incredibly important person, but
wonderfully prickly as well. You could never be. He didn't take any prisoners, did he? If you sat down for a coffee with Keith, it wasn't going to be an easy 20 minutes.
But
I loved him, like you.
But he. Epiphany is not. Anyway, he symbolises what is basically the weakness of the show. Is that the show is about a certain genre of photography that I happen to like very much. I don't think it's any better than any other genre, etc. But it's the genre I like best, and therefore I collected it. And Keith is a way of saying there are other genres, as in a strange sort of way Sian is, because this picture's not typical of her. I think there's too much pompousness about various genres, thinking they're more important than, as I've so often said, if you've ever had a major operation, the most important picture of your life is usually taken up your backside. But how they expand it, or whether they decide they want to expand it, you could have a collection which is very much to do with what you could loosely call documentary, But they do have a lot of topographic pictures in the collection and industrial pictures in the collection, And so in the future they might try to...
Can we move and talk about a topographic picture now? Because there's... let's go this way.
Yeah. Okay, well, this is lovely Sue Packer.
Sue Packer, yes.
In my opinion, one of the very greatest portrait photographers.
Indeed, yeah.
And this, who's this by?
Daniel Meadows.
This is by Daniel Meadows. I love this picture because it was so different from other pictures that I've seen of yours, and it's a beautiful, beautiful picture. But tell me a little bit about it. You and little schoolgirls.
This is in Newcastle on Tyne. I was living on my bus at the time. It would be in the autumn, late summer, autumn of 1974. Yeah. And the way I used to operate on my bus was I'd run a free studio, and people might come if it wasn't raining and have their picture taken, and then I'd get a chance to talk to them and they'd tell me things that were going on, and I don't remember precisely, but somebody must have said, oh, you know, it's the rehearsing for the Girl Guides are rehearsing for Remembrance Sunday, and the Boy Scouts and all the, you know, kids who troop around in uniforms on Sunday. Why don't you wander up? You'll see them all practicing. And you know, I had nothing else to do that morning, so I wandered up, and there was this. Newcastle's full of these huge old, very dark stone buildings in the middle of the city that were, you know, left over from previous industrial age. And there's all these kids, you know, all lining up and being told what to do, and yeah, it's just that's what that picture is.
Well, we have a couple of your bus pictures, and they'll be in the next show as well. So you'll have to walk around again and do another one of these things.
But you know, later on in my life, the two big projects that I did, which were, you know, for me, you know, the things that I really, you know, I identify my own self with, were the bus project, which was a kind of a massive attempt to try and embrace everybody and share photography. And then later on in my life, I did this digital storytelling project with the BBC, where we got a little van of computers together. This is at the very beginning of the computer age. And we travelled around Wales to miners' libraries and welfare halls, public places. And a little team of us taught 10 people at a time how to make 2 minutes of television based on their...
Including me.
Including you. And you did a lovely film in which you talked about the Rodin the Rodin sculpture here. Yeah. And so, yes, we made these little films. And then, because what we were doing was very innovative, it was before, you know, YouTube and before the easy access to video equipment. But after the start of the digital age, people came from different parts of the world to look at what we were doing. And we also went to different parts of the world telling people what we were doing. And I was in a conference in Arizona, and I was up, I think, sort of like 3 in the afternoon. But the slot before me was occupied by Mark Klett. And he was showing a piece of work called Third View, which I looked up on the internet last night because it was one of the first really, really intelligent uses of multimedia. Mark Klett, as you'll probably tell me, it was famous for the re-photography project, which started in the 1970s or 80s, where he followed people like the American pioneering photographers who photographed the landscape, mainly working for the railroad companies, I think. When they were trying to map their way across the Wild West. And Watkins did all these wonderful photographs of Sullivan. And Klett was revisiting these places 100 years later and photographing them. And of course you have the visual difference between the two. And many of these things were to do with man-made differences, dams being built in the desert and that kind of thing. Some was to do with the politics of ownership, how the Native Americans had lost control of bits of land and then how the dominant culture had changed it and so on. Some was to do with erosion. Absolutely fascinating. But using multimedia, he began to overlay these pictures. And that seems to be a continuing project with him. But in the background, what you had with these very spooky and wonderful, weird pictures, he'd gone around with a lot of students and colleagues from the university where he works in America, and they'd picked up off the street stuff. Like there was a tape someone had thrown out of the window. It obviously broken, you know, a sound audio cassette. And it obviously had snapped, and they'd thrown it out of the window. And we were looking at pictures like this. Yeah. And then in the background there'd be sound playing of, you know, like country music going, sort of, you know, howling. And he began to work with multimedia in this way. But anyway, that's what I know about Mark Klett. You tell me how you worked with Mark.
It's more or less the same. He worked at Arizona State University, lectured there, and did this program of the then and now, basically, which I tried in Wales much later. But as you were saying, he does it so accurately. I mean, you know, literally measuring by theodolites and this, that, and that. It was so accurate that the Geological Society could measure soil erosion in the rocks and things over the time. Because, of course, stuff hadn't changed that much. But he's another person that is totally and utterly committed to the country. A bit, you know, Chris Chapman, same sort of thing. And then he'd done this series of pictures of things found in the desert. And actually this picture, I was with him when he shot this picture, because he was taking me to a place where they'd go out in the desert and shoot, you know, amateurs with their anti-tank guns and things like that would shoot. And you'd have these places and there would be these extraordinary things. I've got a few of them. I brought back a gas bottle which had been shot to pieces with machine guns and things and things. And this was so this picture, as much as anything, besides it's the most beautiful print.
It's the most beautiful print.
Yeah. Besides that, reminds me of going out with Mark into the desert and sleeping in a little tent and being scared stiff of scorpions.
But you used to go to Arizona State because Bill Jay was there originally?
I was given a fellowship by the American government, bicentennial fellowship, and I could pick wherever I wanted to go. And I actually picked Arizona. Well, really, I guess it's a combination of two things. One is that it's the opposite to Wales. It's the most right-wing state in America, and Wales was very left-wing at that time. And B, it's the driest state in America, and Wales was obviously wet. And then on top of that, my dear friend Bill was at Arizona State University. And by going there, I got a darkroom. You know, they set me up with a darkroom. I just gave a couple of talks and things. So it all came together, you know, really nicely. I stayed with Bill the whole year I was there, basically. And you know, as I say, met people like Mark who...
But he was a great inspiration to me because I'd always had this idea that you could mix sound and pictures.
Yes,
you didn't need to use video, that somehow there was a kind of audio space within photographs often that sort of was playing in my head. And from the earliest days, even when I was living on my bus, I was trying to record people. But these, you know, the equipment you needed was of an industrial kind of scale and very expensive, and then it all needed to be maintained. And I never had the, you know, when I was living in my bus, I never had that kind of money. But once the digital age came, you could start mixing the two together. Really and seeing what Mark was doing with sound and with pictures and with the now and then thing, you know, kind of, there's a parallel to my own work, you know, going back and visiting people I'd photographed 25 years before. He was, you know, revisiting the great photographs of the American West. And boy, did he do it well. And, you know, if a student needs to study, so, you know, if you want to find one person to study and to understand both the technology of photography plus the depth of understanding of the subject matter plus the sheer beauty of what was produced, for me, I would start them on Mark Klett.
Good. I'll endorse that. I'll send him an email.
Great.